The Road to Autonomy is presented by the Road to Autonomy Index. The Road to Autonomy Index is a rules-based equity benchmark index that measures the performance of a basket of global companies that are involved in the development and commercialization of autonomy. Institutional investors and fund managers are watching megatrends that are shaping investment opportunities today. These megatrends are creating thematic investment ideas and opportunities for forward-thinking investors. We believe that one of the biggest megatrends today is autonomy. That's why we created the Road to Autonomy Index, the world's first and only pure-play index to track the thematic investment opportunity in autonomy. Follow the Road to Autonomy Index on your favorite finance app by simply typing in the ticker Autonomy. To learn more about the Road to Autonomy Index, visit roadtoautonomy.com/index. Hello and welcome to the Road to Autonomy. I'm your host, Grayson Brulte. On today's episode, we're absolutely honored to welcome back Mike Murphy, CEO of EV Politics, host of the wonderful political podcast Hacks on Tap, which features his friend David Axelrod, and longtime Republican political strategist. Mike, you've worked on more campaigns than there's been campaigns in history. It's pretty impressive.
I'm a Jurassic consultant. I go back almost to McKinley. I've been at it a while. I was a media strategist, and I would do the advertising and the strategy. A lot of the GOP governors. I did John Engler in my home state of Michigan, Mitt Romney when he was governor, Jeb Bush, Arnold Schwarzenegger in California, where I live now, and a bunch of senators, too, a couple of presidential races, most notably John McCain, the famous Straight Talk Express. So I've been in the campaign business for a long time, and big in the anti-Trump Republican world, so I'm not doing as much candidate stuff now. Here in New Hampshire, because I work for NBC News and doing a little live from the hotel lobby update. And I do a lot of corporate work with image and advocacy in the issue space. So anyway, if it comes to communicating to people, I might be involved.
You did pretty good. I got to ask you, because there's that very famous photo of Senator McCain going on the Southwest plane when it looked like the campaign was done for. What was the mood on that campaign before the senator had that major comeback eventually to get the Republican nominee?
Well, the first time, was the real long shot in 2000, then in 2008. And I didn't run that campaign, though. I was very friendly with McCain, so I talked to him all the time. I remember meeting him here in New Hampshire at a Quality Inn in December before the January primary. And the campaign was out of money. He'd been written off for dead, been ditched by a couple of advisors. And we met at midnight. I was in Boston, but I drove up. We're sitting in the lobby because the place didn't have a bar. And McCain was like, "I'm thinking I might drop out." And I was like, "Look, I know you're out of money and everybody says you're dead, but the New Hampshire primary, you have a special relationship there. You own that lottery ticket, so at least play it." And McCain did, because John McCain did not quit. He was tough as tough can be. I remember once, he never really brought it up publicly during the campaign, but after in 2000, we lost South Carolina primary after we won big in New Hampshire. And then we went on that Tuesday to win Michigan, but it wasn't enough, so we started fading out. But anyway, he was on the old Meet the Press after New Hampshire, and Russert asked him, "How you doing? What's it like to lose a big primary like that?" McCain just laughed and said, "Look, Timmy, I used to stay at a hotel for a couple of years where they didn't leave a mint on the pillow. This is nothing. This is an honor to even be on the ballot." So he didn't quit. He won the 2008 New Hampshire primary in an upset, and that slowed my pal Mitt Romney down. That's one reason I didn't work for McCain in 2008. I'm also very close to Romney, and I had two of my guys in the race, so I stepped aside and friend to both, but partisan for neither. And he won the nomination. Then he lost, but I remember he told me when Colin Powell, I was with McCain at his place in Arizona, and the phone rang, and it was Colin Powell, the general, telling him he was going to endorse Obama. And he and Powell were close, McCain and Powell. So McCain understood, and he hung up and said, "Boy, it's hard to run against history," speaking of Obama. So anyway, JSM was great. I miss him very much. He'd be appalled by what's happening in the party right now, as Mitt Romney is.
There's a lot happening in the party. There's also a lot happening in the economy. You're there in New Hampshire now, so you're getting an on-the-ground feel for it. I want to highlight, because you did something really interesting, which surprised me when you did it. I got to say, it did surprise me. You decided last summer to get in a VW ID.4 all-electric and drive cross-country from New Hampshire to Los Angeles. Mike, what were you thinking?
Well, my nickname is Conestoga, I'll tell you what happened. I'm from Detroit. I grew up around the car business. Love cars. Total motorhead. I had a lot of internal combustion cars that I loved. Last car before I had the head injury and became an EV nut was a Porsche GTS. And, I burned a lot of dinosaur juice in that thing. And so I was big on the diesels too. I always thought the technology was elegant. A couple of turbo diesels. So anyway, a lot of cars. I even had a Jensen Interceptor, which is, I used to joke, built in the 70s. It had 800 employees and 114 unions at the plant in England. And they basically dropped a 440 Chrysler RV motor into kind of a sleek handmade convertible and tried to compete with Austin Martin. So total nut car guy. But after scoffing for a long time, the EVs won me over. Because if you step back and look at the physics of it, fewer moving parts, less regular maintenance, you need less people to build them, which is good in the general sense for mobility. There are a lot of reasons. So I was never a big E-line guy, and I didn't like the center display on the Tesla. So I respect the engineering a lot, but I wasn't bonkers for Tesla. But when other makes started catching up, I fell for it. So my daily driver in LA is a BMW iX, which I totally love, and I drive that thing all over the place. But I started getting interested in EV policy, including all the dilemma around CCS charging standard, which, we're working our way out of now with universal NACS. Nice job, SAE, for getting that standard done quickly. But I'm sitting in New Hampshire. We have a lake house there, my family. And as I've spent so much time here doing politics, and again, I'm originally from Detroit now. I lived on the East Coast till I moved to California after we got Arnold elected. I go up to the local VW dealer up there, and we have a Tiguan, a used Tiguan that was kind of the New Hampshire car we drive around in all summer long. And I took the Tiguan in for an oil change, and I was talking to the guy, and I said, how are the ID.4s going? He says, good vehicle, but it's hard up here. There's no charging for CCS, so they keep coming back. In fact, see that one there, 400 miles on it? I'll pay you to take it. So one thing led to another. And remember, no sales tax there. So anyway, next thing you know, I'm an ID.4 owner. I slap a Grizzly charger in the garage. So I got 32 amps. So I have a way to charge it because it really is north of Manchester. There's nothing. I'm actually trying to build a charge station in Concord now. It's one of the reasons I'm here looking at sites. Battery-based charger, because otherwise you wait 3 years for the power company to show up and then they kill you if demand. I have a lot of opinions on EV charging, but I'm on a tangent. So anyway, I thought I like this thing so much, I'll drive it to LA and then next summer drive it back because it's a New Hampshire car. It's got to essentially live there. So I thought I'll drive it across the country and write about it. So on Substack, which I think is Mike Murphy 96 or Mike Murphy 1, whatever my Substack name is, I took a road trip. And I experienced charging infrastructure firsthand, the good, the bad, the ugly. And the ID.4 was great, by the way. I'm a fan of the car. And I think the new improvements this year are going to be even better. So that got me going. And I see so much Republican EV bashing. And I thought, here are magnificent machines that are just at the beginning of their development curve. The battery tech is going to get better and better. The recycling of the rare, everything's moving in the right direction. And I wrote a Substack about everybody I see in the EV space seems to be so happy. The engineers is like Apollo, big tough problem. And I'm sure it's the same thing in autonomous vehicles that we're going to solve for the good of everybody. And so I just don't like the bashing because I'm a free market conservative. I think people ought to make a choice, and these cars have become loaded with politics. So I started evpolitics.org, and we're all over the internet. We have a website. And I got my crazy friend, a Republican pollster of note, Dr. David Hill, who, by the way, back when was a DeLorean driver. I mean, a real car nut. Yeah, an Irish-made plastic stainless steel box. I used to give him a lot of crap about it. But he loved that damn thing. And, of course, he was an early Tesla guy. And so we did a national poll to find out what's going on with all this polarization between Republicans and Democrats over EVs. And we learned a ton. Some of it's up on the website. And now I'm just trying to go out and be a Pied Piper with the intellectual property we've gained, looking at it like campaign people, which is a little different than traditional market researchers. And one, we're trying to help the companies get better at this because they've got a huge segment of the market that thinks EVs are bad. And I can talk about some polling when you want to. But we also have huge opportunity. So anyway, that's what I'm up to now in addition to my corporate work, and had some good calls with one of the leadership, one of the German companies, and I'm trying to get back home to Detroit and get in front of Jim Farley and some people who can make decisions, not lobbyists in D.C., and show them the polling deck for free and try to be helpful here because there needs to be a big recalibration in the messaging.
The messaging's been horrendous. I own an EV. When we used to have lunch in LA when I lived out there, I had the turbo diesel Porsche Cayenne, which we talked about, and it was great. It was great technology, and then
I remember, yeah.
And then I had a gas car down here in Florida, and I went to an EV, and it's been great. But the charging infrastructure's been horrendous. I'll give you one story. I would take the family from South Florida, we go to Disney World. Okay, so we get the EV. What do I die to do? I pulled a Mike Murphy, but not as far. We take a road trip. And we go to Disney, and we arrive with, I think we left at 80%, we arrive with 2%. And we roll into the hotel. There's one charger, a trickle charger. So you have the app. It took over 24 hours to charge it. And it was only one charger. And I think the hotel had 480 rooms at this hotel at Disney World. It's not scalable. So what were some of the issues and hiccups that you saw on the road? You documented some on your Substack. I remember we're trying to charge, and my wife's like, oh, this is not going to be good. This is not going to be good. Because she was nervous.
Yeah, what are you thinking?
What did you experience firsthand out on the road?
Well, it started pretty well, and I learned some of the highway driving tricks. I mean, left to my own devices, I fire up the Valentine radar detector and I'm over 80. But that delta between 72 and 79 on an EV is significant in terms of your battery burn. So I learned some of those tricks. So I rolled into a Shell recharge station in upstate New York, just over the Vermont line. It worked perfectly. So now I'm cocky because I've only been overnight charging this thing on a level 2, which really is the best way if you don't know the EV. So, but now this is going to be nothing but superchargers. I used CCS out in LA, but with the VW it was new. And so now I'm feeling cocky, but I've read all the internet stuff on Electrify America, EV Go, and I'm rolling up and I figure next stop EV Go, but why don't I go a little farther north and check out the Tesla Magic Dock, which is their dual use thing that they're now rolling out bigger. But there are only a couple, and they're all around Buffalo where they make them, or at least last summer they were all around. So I go, and of course the Magic Duck doesn't work, but that's my fault. I just reconnected, and boom, it's fine. Works perfectly. So I'm like, that clever Elon, yet again. And so, but the next one was a Electrify America station, where of course I went up to a dispenser that didn't work. And then the one I had was derated down to 48 amps for a while. So that was somewhat frustrating. Then after that, I wound up in Cleveland at an EV Go station. And I roll in and I plug it in and it won't handshake. And I'm going nuts. I get the hardest job in the world is being an EV Go or Electrify America 1-800 operator, because people are calling murder threats in after about 20 minutes of problems. So it's light rain and I plug it in and it bricks. I can't get it out of the car. And I think I got to open the trunk and pull the wire off the solenoid, get into all that. But luckily they restart the machine. It starts charging. So, okay, 15 minutes on the phone. I'm kind of a surly helper, but it's working now. I'm into this. Then there's a power failure, not at the station, at the whole substation. Some transformer blew up in the rain. So everything goes dull. So now the thing is like hardcore bricked because there's no power in anything. The step-down transformer, the traffic lights, everything's out. So 10 minutes of that in the rain, and then the power comes back up, reboot the machine, and it's still not handshaking. But I've gotten a little power. So then I run to an EA station on the interstate on the way west, and it works great. And I have about 5 or 6 good Electrify America experiences in a row. And then I had another dog one where I had to move to 2 chargers, but fundamentally it worked. And the most fun I had writing this Substack piece, and I'll give you a link if you do show notes or anything like that, if people want to read it, was that crazy little station at the coffee place in rural Utah, where there's no charging forever, but to go from Denver down to LA, you got to stop there. So somebody, Electrify America, must have been like a movie, said, whatever it cost, and in came the 3 semis and the black helicopters and the power company and the bewildered locals. They're dropping in $1 million worth of charging next to a coffee place that looks very charming with rusted old chairs in front that wasn't open, with a guy in a Rivian, me. It's the only stop. It's like the dead-end saloon. I'd have that coffee stand open 24/7 because you got a captive audience, about 180 degrees. So pretty much there were some bumps, but it worked pretty well. The other disaster was Las Vegas. So go to an EVA station, there's a huge wait, fast charging. Go to another one, there's another huge wait. There are 2 nice ladies chatting through the windshield, parked parallel, each on a station, each in a Kia, each trying to go to 100%. So frustrated, can't remember what he was driving. It might have been an i4. Anyway, it comes over and explains to him the 80% state of charge, and they chew his ass out like an episode of Cops breaks out. And so finally, the sweetest guy in the world, who of course is in a Bolt, so he's going to be there for a week and a half, pulls out, and I get that one, and I get just enough to hop down the road. But the Vegas thing was a total 100-degree parking lot rage nightmare, and they're just underserved with fast charging stations. So It worked out. I learned a lot. I'm fun on the industry calls because they'll be like, well, Dieter, have you ever driven a CCS car 3,000 miles across America? Well, in the lab, the same. Like, well, let me tell you. Though they've been great. I can't name them, but the German company I've been talking to the leadership of, they totally get it. And they're writing a big check to build their own network here. But yeah, learned a lot. I have a lot, then the nice thing about being a longtime political blowhard on television or knowing a lot of politicians is when you're cranky, you get to chew their ears off. So I called Buttigieg's right-hand guy. I think a lot of Pete. I'm friendly with him. And I said, let me tell you about Navy. And the poor guy, but he was so sweet about it. And they know their problems. I mean, I'm a right-wing nut. I don't like subsidies, but I'm all for the Navy. One is they give all the money to the states. And that's like building a jet turbine engine with 50 different screw makers. You increase your failure chance significantly because what Vermont wants to do with charging is a lot different than California. The governor who's done the best job and opened the first station is good old Mike DeWine, a good old-fashioned meat and potatoes Republican in Ohio, who's got his act together. But in a lot of states, they're like, you get some mid-level bureaucrat. For example, New Hampshire. So there are some fast chargers in Manchester, but the Lakes region, which gets a lot, I have a friend from Boston who's had his Lucid towed twice trying to get to Middle Northern because there are no chargers up there. There's a couple of 50 kilowatt, sometimes they work, sometimes they don't, voltage chargers at a mall in Tilton, New Hampshire. So I look at Concord. There's a Tesla station, of course, but CCS, there's nothing. So I figure, well, hello, Navy, maybe I'll apply. So go through the process a little bit. And I'm told because the chargers all stop at Manchester, New Hampshire, 30 miles from the border to Massachusetts, you're too close. You're 29 miles away. But 100 miles north of me, there's nothing. I'm right on the interstate, so I don't qualify for Navy. The state is just started taking applications. They're way behind. There's some guy named Rufus in the basement of the Pepperidge Farm. Charges. Yeah, hang on. Louie, get over here. I mean, they're just not. Now, it'll get better like everything does in government. So that experience and learning a lot about the power infrastructure led me to two conclusions which form my opinion on this stuff. Sure, do it, and there are all these neighborhood zoning things. Like in LA, the farther you are from where there's a high density of EV owners, the more charging stations there are. There's social engineering policy involved, which isn't bad, but it's not optimal. I told the Buttigieg guys, they should have just given the power companies a subsidy and let free enterprise decide where to put all the chargers. Because right now, as you know, you build a traditional charger, you need a power infrastructure like a Walmart superstore for one of those big EV Go or Electrify America stations. So the power company says, yeah, we'll get back to you in 2 years. So when you go through all that, particularly in California, some places are quicker. Then when you use it, you get wiped out by demand charging. So when you sell people power at 55 cents a kilowatt, you don't make any money. You could even lose money or make 3 cents. There's no margin, which is why EV Go, God bless them, because they're getting a lot better. I use them a lot in LA. Their stock has gone from 12 to $3. They're growing the top line, but they're bleeding cash everywhere. So that made me a believer in distributed fast charging. My favorite in their space, there's a couple. There's a German company. There's another one, I think also European. And then there's FreeWire up in Fremont. And they do the battery-based thing. So you drop a machine in there. You can't charge 100 cars, but you don't need all the big power infrastructure. It's like you're putting a subway strip mall in, which is very normal for the power company. Thing charges all night cheaply, and it vends power all day. 2 dispensers or built in, 2 nozzles. It'll get up to 150 kilowatts. I've used them. There are a couple on the I-5. They work great. And you get a decent tax credit for dropping it in. You don't have all the power hassles. So I thought, all right, let's put a couple of those in under Navy. Nope, too close to Manchester. So now I'm literally in the place in Concord by the 93 and the 89 where I'm trying to drop one. And we're looking at a few other places. So the idea of these battery-based, quicker to install, they can't do 30 cars. It's 8, depending on how they're spaced out, because it's always drawing power. It might be 8 cars a day. It might be 14, but you can make a small or medium profit on selling the electricity. You don't get killed as much by demand charges. So I think that distributed in small strip shopping centers for convenience could be the model of the future. The other thing, and I'll stop monologuing, L2 charging. It's the multifamily units where the landlords can't afford or don't want to put in overnight level 2, 40 amp, even 32 amp chargers. Because if you can charge overnight and at your workplace, you're only going to need a fast charger if you hit your head and decide to drive to New Hampshire from LA or maybe up to Sacramento or San Francisco. There'll be one fast charging stop. And the feds aren't spending money on that. Illinois has a new law, and I put a blog post about all this on evpolitics.org, where they're requiring new construction to lay at least conduit. They don't have to put in the equipment, but they have to have the capacity. And while the concrete is wet, lay the conduit, because otherwise you're going to saw cut and put it back. Nightmare. So I would move a lot of the NEVI focus to multifamily level 2 charging, because those apartments where the kids are, and as the prices go down, hopefully not via a Chinese EV invasion, that's where they're going to go. And right now, if you live in an apartment with an EV, most of the time you're driving out to the Walmart waiting in a big line for a fast charger that's probably derated if you're CCS. So now, I'm sorry for the long spiel, but NEVI 2 is ready for a lot of improvements, and the focus has to be level 2, particularly in multifamily condo and apartment buildings. That'll be the tipping point for charging.
It will be the tipping point, but the backside of that, how do you get the utilities to play ball? You hear these nightmare stories, the Mañana show, and they just delay and drag their feet. So how do you get them to play ball?
That's the million-dollar question, particularly for the big fast charging places. On the level 2s, if you have the load management, you don't need to put in 40 amps for every parking space. You basically can feed 4 level 2 chargers sharing a 40 amp circuit. So it's still a lift for the power infrastructure, but it's like putting a satellite into orbit rather than a Mars mission for the power company. They, I think, can figure it out. And, the charges are a lot less, and often there's incentives. With the big stuff, again, what the poor Biden guys, they had to hear a spiel like this, but they kind of got it. I said, why, instead of giving money to the states and letting them reg it and have the states that aren't for it drag it out and all this stuff, how about this? You just do a program where if you build a station with, 98, whatever it is, uptime, we'll subsidize your power. You can buy it at 18 kilowatts an hour, and you can go sell it for 50. So now you have something with a return on equity, which means you can go figure out where to put it and let the market meet the demand. And we're blow our billions guaranteeing the power company 35 cents a kilowatt or even 40, and we'll cover your margin as long as you charge X number of cars a week. In other words, you have an effective station. Now it's really simple. Now the power companies can say, all right, we have a dedicated customer here for the next 5 years buying at least X power at a rate we make money on. And the federal government handles the delta between the 18 you're paying and then the 35 or 40 that's the power company costs. So all the money, if you give away free beer, people will figure out where to build the bars and what the tap ought to be and the basics. You just give them a supply for this purpose of cheap power that doesn't screw the power companies. Now everybody has the same interest. How do we move more power? We're making money and you're marking it up and making money. And the feds for 5-7 years are going to subsidize this as the demand grows. Much simpler, uses market incentives rather than now. I went on the California site because we're looking at a couple of free wire chargers there in different places. And the regulations, I'm going to have to take a year off to go to Harvard Law School to be able to figure out which of the 17 corridors I'm in that might have a subsidy. It's just madness. Government's not good at this. Government can do a big thing like, hey, we'll provide cheap power for 10 years if you build a charger station that maintains a certain uptime. And sure, you can tack on the Buy American stuff. I'm all for that. Though most of the fast chargers that are Buy American, I'm a European charging company or I'm Chinese, do knockdown kits. I ship in 3 crates. I hire 100 guys in a big warehouse turned into a quote-unquote factory in Texas, bolt them all together, Tennessee, bolt them all together and ship it. Yeah, I don't even mind that, but the factory is a strong word for some of that stuff. But it's good. Jobs, etc. But the purchasing loop, the complication, then you get a state that's an activist state saying, well, what about left-handed people missing 2 fingers? We need a special nozzle here in Vermont or here in West Virginia. They start speccing it up. If you ever take the Acela train from DC to New York, the new ones are better, but the first generation fast electric Acela, every train set was different. They're essentially custom built because Amtrak would decide after 2, we want the door an inch to the right. It's just kind of, we got a letter from a mad congressman. He likes doors being over to the side. So government's not particularly good at this, even though I'm for the spend and I'll defend the program because net, more fast chargers on the highway is an important thing. And of course, the NACS come together will simplify a lot. We're just going to need more stations. Even the Tesla network will not be able to take anything like where this will be in another 5-9 years.
Does NACS accelerate the growth of electric vehicles? And on the backside, from your background in communications, does the consumer believe the reliability that comes with the NACS versus the CCS? The
average car buyer, so we did this poll. We talked to 600 people around the country, which is about a 4% margin of error, like a political poll. And the one trick was we didn't talk to all the voters. We talked to people with a family income of $50,000 a year or higher. which is basically 2/3 of the presidential electorate. We left the other third aside because we wanted to double down on sampling people who are potentially in the new car market. Not that people, they're retired people who don't have a big income but have money, but we wanted to really put our 600 sample on top of the car market. You can even argue off NADA data, you ought to start at 90,000, but we didn't want to go that narrow. So we got 2/3 of the voters, and we got a pretty wide market. So one of the most interesting things we found is we asked people, what is your biggest concern about getting an electric car? We asked them the name things we combined, so each number I give you will be top 2 reasons. Number 1 was money, expensive, combined 58%. Number 2 was insufficient range for trips, 53%. So those are the big 2, but we also had charger networks are unreliable, 43%. The interesting thing is that Republicans and Democrats mostly agree on all that. They don't agree on EVs, and I can give you some data on it. But on the big 3, they really do. So it's cost, which is a big issue because either North American makers are going to figure it out, or eventually the Chinese are going to come and do it to them. And the range/charging anxiety, that is a big thing. But we also have the technology is confusing, and it makes me nervous. And that's not nearly as high on the ratings, but among older women, there are subgroups where that really rings a bell. And then finally, and this is kind of interesting, in the whole Republican versus Democratic space, EV batteries are from China and they're bad for the environment. Among Republicans, that's up in the 30s. Among everybody else, significantly lower. And that's one of the Republican attacks on EVs. So you can see it getting a little traction there. Now, for all these things, we have good messages. But right now, charging is a huge perceived problem. The other thing that's interesting, well, there's a lot of interesting stuff in the data, which is why I want to get it to the industry. But when we ask people, do you have any friends or relatives that drive an electric vehicle? 44% say yes, 56% say no. In other words, 44% know somebody. Among those people, regardless of Republican or Democrat, in every question about EVs, they do better than people who don't. So if you have friends with one, if you know some experience, you hear something peer-to-peer, or you borrow it for an hour, you think a lot more of EVs in every category. Now, I'll give you one more piece of data, and then we can dive in wherever you want. This shows you what the divide is. We asked people a lot of questions about what's your favorite car brand, and we gave them some representative brands, and we clumped brands together under nationality to even make it a little more political. But we asked people what their the Ford Motor Company. Do you have a mostly favorable opinion of Ford or a mostly unfavorable? Democrats, 77% said they were mostly favorable about the Ford Motor Company. 23% said unfavorable. That's a 3-to-1 ratio, which is good. Most politicians would pray to be in that kind of ratio between a favorable and unfavorable rating. So Democrats, 77 over 23, favored to unfavored. Republicans, 71 favorable to 29 unfavorable. Little less happy, but fundamentally, there's not a lot of partisan difference. And then we did opinion of car brands. Among Republicans, it was 9% favorable, 40% unfavorable. 40 points upside down. That's like tobacco company numbers or worse. Among Democrats, it was more like 30 over 20. Net positive, but not as positive. And that's brands like Polestar, Tesla, Rivian. Now, among their owners, we're looking at the whole world here, but that's the future market you want to grow into. The thing was incredible. So if we ask people their opinion on climate change, and by about 63-37, 63% said climate change, serious problem, we got to do something about. 37% said it's overhyped by the media and it's not that big a deal. And of course, those correlate pretty much by party. And so among people who say climate change is a serious problem, 29% favorable. Among people who say climate change is overhyped, 10% favorable. Among people who say climate change is overhyped, 52% unfavorable. And we have a million more questions and levels of data here, which I won't put everybody to sleep with. Some of it's on our website, evpolitics.org. But it's the environmental thing that's in the way. When we ask attributes about why is it a good idea to buy an electric vehicle, not paying for gas, helping the environment, both rank up high. But among Republicans, not paying for gas is running 20 points higher. Among Democrats, the environment is 11 points. And then finally, we asked people, this is one of my favorite questions, as we had all these kind of opinion questions about what EVs. If you bought an EV, what would your best friends and relatives think about that? Is it a smart move, too big a risk, you spent too much money, or you're just becoming too political? So among Republicans, 19% said smart move. 61% of Democrats said smart move. Among Republicans, 48% said you're taking too big a risk. Among Democrats, 23%, half, said you're taking too big a risk. You spent too much money. There's a little closer agreement on that. 29% of Democrats think you spent too much money to buy an EV because they are kind of defined by cost in addition to all the green stuff. 49% of Republicans said you spent too much TV. And then the numbers of you're becoming too political are lower, but it's almost 3-1 in terms of Republicans 18, Democrats 7. So what has happened is electric vehicles are not perceived as cars. They're perceived as political statements beyond just cars. When you make the debate about cars, the Republicans like the EV stuff. But when you add I'm virtue signaling here. I got a turn signal right, left, and the whole car glows that I'm a good person. Polar bear, white polar bear ads, all that kind of stuff. You get the Newton problem. You get in our polarized politics. You please one side, you get an opposite reaction displeasing the other. So now you're caught in the world of 50-50 split country politics, which is not if you're selling cars where you want to be. So my friends on the environmental side say, no, they're just stupid. We got to educate them on climate change. Well, hopefully, because I believe in climate change, but good luck. That is an uphill tribal fight in the short term. Younger Republicans are better, so in time, they will become all Republicans. There's long-term hope. But in the meantime, and this is why I want to kind of get a bunch of this data in front of the CMOs at some of these companies, because I'm a Detroit guy. I care about manufacturing in America. I like that my ID.4 was made in Tennessee with a battery made in Georgia. But enough with the polar bears and the little green flames on the car and all that stuff. If you are a consumer who is worried about climate change, you already know all about EVs. And you're very interested in it. You're worried about charging and price. Well, that's fixable, not easy, but they're ready to go. They're ready. If you're a consumer who is suspicious of EVs, you need a lot more information. You need the marketing campaign because you're shut down. Everybody else is just price. And then you have competitive fighting within, go to your friendly dealer, our dealer's place. There's all that regular stuff that they know how to do. But the green label is spent. I wouldn't spend another dollar on that because they're not going to get anybody they don't get already for free because that half of the market's figured it out. The other half of the market needs a pitch. Finally, my favorite data in the whole thing, and we haven't, this will be a world exclusive here. Now, he's Elon, so in 2 years, who knows? He'll decide electric cars are insane. We all got to go to hydrogen or whatever, or space buggies. But it's interesting that for all the flack and baggage Elon's brand image has with people who are most friendly to EVs, over in the world, they need to persuade, open. The EVs do pretty well. And again, just to reiterate one point, the peer-to-peer stuff really works. If I were Ford, I would take some of that lightning inventory and I would, with the marketing data they had, this is how we do it in a campaign. We'll find 40, 60 zip codes, 100 dealers, where there's a delta between people we think would like it, but have these artificial ideological barriers. We talk about range anxiety, charging anxiety, price. There's a new barrier, which is ideological barrier. And I would invent a 6-month lease for not a lot of money, and I would just keep people driving them. Because if people in your peer group have one, your opinion changes. Experiential stuff. Target a lot of it, but let people play with the product. It's a great product, but politics is in the way. So anyway, that's the kind of data we have. We're trying to spread the word, and we're also doing the straight up politics. It just so happens that 68% of the Electoral College votes, which pick the president, come from states with massive EV investments, swing states, particularly Michigan and Georgia. So we want to make it politically expensive for the Republicans to bash EVs in those states that'll decide the presidential election. And so we're going to be doing more. We're going to be launching EV Republicans. If you Google that now, you'll get to our main site. But we got a lot of stuff coming. And of course, we have a merch store. So if you want to irritate your Republican friends, if you're one of, like me, a kind of secret EV-loving Republican, we got the stuff for you, believe me.
Why have EVs become such a political issue? And there's more data that you put out that I want to highlight. And you asked the individuals, agree or disagree, EVs are the future and one day I'll probably drive one. The results were as follows. 44% of Republicans disagreed, while 72% of Democrats disagreed. So to me, you've got a marketing problem there. You mentioned the white polar bear. So we've had many great lunches in LA. We're going to go over to Century City here to when Mike Ovitz was running CAA. He approached Coca-Cola and they did the polar bears, and that changed Coca-Cola's sales, then put them on a growth trajectory again. The micro lease with Ford's brilliant. You can partner with AutoNation. Ivan Mankowski's built their micro lease program. You can do that, so you have options. But where's that Mike Ovitz moment? Where's that embrace and say, we got a political issue here, because don't forget, there's a very good chance Trump takes the White House again. And then all suddenly, EVs are going to become the boogeyman. We're already starting to see it on the campaign trail.
In fact, she's actually a very sweet person, but over Christmas, Senator Joni Ernst of Iowa, her spokesman did one of the old press hack tricks we see in politics, which is it's a slow news time, so do a Christmas gimmick. And she had some ridiculous and it's basically going after the EV subsidies. And my head almost exploded. So going into evpolitics.org, we're going to push back. So we fired back, wait a minute. The ethanol subsidy, which you fight for the death in Iowa, is Pretty Boy Floyd level bank robbery compared to a parking ticket on what the EV subsidy costs. So, nobody's out there pushing back within the conservative world. What happens is a lot of the people, God bless them, and they've had huge wins, who have been in the electrification movement, and I wish them all the luck in the world, they always go to the environment, because they're environmental people who found EVs as a tool to make mobility both better and emit less carbon. And I agree with them, and go get it. But in the world they got to move, it's a different planet. So we're going to kind of push back with Republican conservative market language, jobs. And by the way, on the sales subsidies, Republicans like them. Republicans take a check. So we tested that. Are the subsidies a good thing? And there's not a good pushback in the wider Republican area. But right now, the Republican polls just sense an easy layup market. They can get a hit on Fox. They can complain about Joe Biden. And of course, if Biden's for it, we're against it. It's easy for them. So we're going to try to make it a little bit less easy.
When does China become an issue? Because 80+% of the minerals that go into the batteries go through China. They control it. And then the CCP is threatening to cut off access to those minerals. And to me, it becomes a national security issue if we're all moving to electric vehicles. So when is that brought up more from a substance standpoint?
Well, yeah, it's a tricky one, because in Republican world, the whole Chinese battery thing is growing, because, of course, they want to do the Mr. Bean. I don't know. We have a quiz on the website where we knock down most of the myths you hear. And, of course, Rowan Atkinson, a great comic actor, by the way, but he wrote a piece in Telegraph or somewhere in the UK that got some internet circulation on, the lithium. And it's pretty well debunked. There's a Volvo study that is always cited. But if we debate it defensively, there are two answers. Again, campaign thinking. Yeah, it's terrible. So we can't have electric cars because they're full of Chinese lithium. Well, that's a good way to not move electric cars. The other way is the biggest rare earth materials recycling site in the world is being built with American technology by Redwood. And a lot more of that is coming. And we're crash building, spending billions upon billions upon billions of dollars building our own battery plants. So we're in a transition now. So every year it gets better, and it's getting better fast. It won't happen overnight. So sell hope and sell the transition to American-made batteries. The real issue is, will the Chinese start finding a way into our market beyond the tariffs? And if Trump wins, he may have a more open-minded approach there. I'm not sure. He's signaled both ways. Trump used to own a Tesla, by the way. So, you never know where he's transactional. He can be anywhere. But if you look at the case study of Mexico, and we linked to some good material on that on the site, Motor Trend did a great video about it, a little documentary, won some awards. They start assembling in Mexico and coming up, and they're going to be in the $27,000 quality EV business. One of the things is, God bless the incredibly talented at organizing Sean Fain at the UAW. Ideologically, gives me a migraine. But the UAW finally figured out how to punch above its weight. But Chinese auto workers make $6 or $8 an hour. So that's the competition. And most Chinese EV companies have gone bankrupt because there's so much subsidies. But BYD, the big pony there, and some of the others are super competitive, and they're coming. So we've got to make it a question of the future of mobility around the world is going electric. Do we want America to be a big player in that, or do we want to be Britain in the 70s and we'll just keep closing rover plants? Because our 10% world market alone is not enough to be able to have enough production to be competitive technologically. So on the battery stuff, we go on offense. The recycling tech is coming. It's getting better every day. There are a lot of startups. Redwood's a very impressive idea. We can do it here. The ability is here, and Biden is slow walking opening the market. We're basically a free trade company, but I think that's because of all the subsidies that China does to their companies. I think it's a national security imperative that we give our guys a chance to compete, but they will not get on their feet if the North American market, for political reasons, decides we're going to hold our nose till we pass out. Okay, then learn Chinese. It's pretty clear on the national security side what we have to do here, which is grab the future and be competitive. And finally, let's not forget, of the top 5 auto companies in China, top 2, BYD, we talked about, Warren Buffett, an early investor there, and Tesla, an American company. And for all the beating on General Motors, their partnership with SAIC in electrics and everywhere else has been quite successful. And they've got a big market share there. I'll never forget, after the Obama election in 2008, I had sold a screenplay to HBO. I had to write it. So I got on a freighter. And I took a freighter with a buddy, another writer. We each got a cabin. And we went across the Pacific because I wanted to kind of enter Shanghai by sea like the old days. And I get out of there in China and in bustling 2009 China. And in the highway outside of Shanghai, I could have opened my window and started throwing tennis balls randomly out the window without aiming. And 7 out of 10 cars I hit would have been Buicks, mostly designed in the U.S. So our guys can compete, but they've got to get the U.S. market behind them. And that means getting U.S. consumers to open their minds to the future here and not be dumb because politicians want cheap applause. And not be dumb because the left only wants to talk about the environment and therefore polarize the thing and shut down half the damn market.
Let's dive into, you mentioned BYD investor Berkshire Hathaway. They have Berkshire Hathaway Energy, one of their largest subsidiaries that they own there. So why, I'm going to go campaign world, why doesn't a politician campaign on mining and refining in the U.S.? Let's build a new refinery. Let's remove all the regulatory hurdles and allow mining. We have a very large lithium, some say one of the largest in the world underneath the United States. Why don't we start pulling out, put the environmental stuff aside and start creating jobs and own this market?
I feel the same way about the new gen nuclear stuff. Yeah, it's a great answer. It's very clean. Of all people, the Oliver Stone, the Hollywood renegade, made a great documentary, I think for Showtime, one of the streamers about 8 months ago about the case for nuclear. But, we let our squabbling politics get in the way. So China doesn't have to worry about that. They just say, guess what? We're going to fund the hell out of 20 EV companies, and then we're going to dump them on the world market. And Mr. Auto Worker, quit complaining. Here's $8 an hour. I'll never forget when I got off that big freighter in Shanghai, a bunch of the dock workers ran up to me. They wanted to try their English. Now, I guarantee you, if you get off a ship from China at the port of Long Beach, you're not going to have a lot of longshoremen saying, let me try my Chinese out on you. And they didn't know much. And one of the cargo officers came down and it translated a little, but we had a kind of a fun conversation. And I said, and let me preface it by saying, I'd just gone up the river and I saw like 3 brand new Detroits that you pass. So it's a sobering experience. We get to check out the other dugout, and they're for real. So anyway, I asked them, do you guys have a union? And they're, that was a weird, we have a workers thing. Do you have health care? And they all looked, they started laughing. And one guy looked at me and said, China, work, then die. So it's amazing we're still, in many ways, more competitive. And they've got their own problems. They're really 2 Chinas. They're trying to industrialize the part. They have riots at job fairs because the interior provinces want to taste the standard of living of the manufacturing areas. But we had actually put on the glove and play the game here. And it just drives me crazy that our domestic politics, which is often stupid versus stupid, is in the way. The good news, though, again, is they're great products. Drive one and industry, price them right. They ought to forget the rental car fleets. Jim Farley, please go put 200 Lightnings in the right dealerships and let people have them for 90 days cheap. And then you can sell them used and try to break even on them. Cut $100 million of advertising to do that. You sell more stuff. Or Mach-E's. Or when Mary Barra and the GM team gets back to manufacturing again, which seems to have been a problem, but I have confidence, having grown up with a lot of GM engineers, they're going to fix that. Do the same thing. Let the sample trick works. Anyway, I'm sorry, I'm just passionate about this thing because I see how we can screw up.
Passion is great. So let's fast forward to next year. Trump assumes the presidency again. What happens to EV tax credits, 1? And 2, do EVs become even more polarized from a political issue if that happens?
Yeah, they could. They'll probably go after the credits. And it kind of depends how the real appropriators who run the budget, what the president wants to do in the House and Senate, which party controls it. But with Trump, there'd be more EV bashing. But if we do our jobs in the right states and get that world organized, if it's not working, Trump will move on to something else. He used to be pro-EV because he thought that's where the votes were. Then he found kind of Republican populism, get Fox wound up, then against it. But it's our number one T-shirt, and we're not trying to make any money of T-shirts. I just want people wearing stuff as a visibility thing, is our red, white, and blue logo. And then I drive an EV. I own an EV. I like it, and I vote. in blue and red. I'd ideally like to get 100,000 of those out. Trump starts seeing them at rallies. He'll get on to something else. So we don't have, I'm paying for all this right now. I got to get out and raise some industry money for this to scale it up. But I just want to make sure we do Ohio and Michigan and go on the offense in North Carolina, defend Nevada. Those 4 states are of the top 7 for EV investment. They're like 1, 2, 4, and 5. So that's enough. If we can, it's like a jiu-jitsu move. If we can grab the right 2 fingers and twist there, we can move the 200-pound body. But we need the company. There's massive marketing spend on this stuff. And I think a lot of them are we're underwater on it. Sales are growing at a rapid rate, but not as fast. And I don't think a lot of those CMOs have really figured out how to do the electric thing, understanding you got to look at the political dimension, not just everything else. So I think it's a fixable problem, but we got to smarten up. And that's where we're trying to help, both on the IP side and in the political engagement.
To me, so you look at EV sales are growing, but in 2023, U.S. individuals purchased over 1 million hybrids, up 76% year over year. So I started looking into that and making some phone calls. It turns out one of the reasons, not political, that consumers are opting not to buy EVs is the increase in insurance costs because of the battery, because of electronics. How do we get those costs down? Because to me, that's a big deterrent to have an individual go outside of charging.
It is. And there's an argument for the hybrids. I think the Stellantis guys are geniuses with this new highly electric hybrid pickup truck, because that thing can be a 60-mile-a-day EV until you need to move something, which EV pickup trucks are not so great towing. If they price that thing right, I think it's going to be a huge hit for them. And that's not a bad way to socialize. Wait a minute, I don't have to go to the gas station most days. I just plug it in overnight in the garage. Cheaply, I'm in. By the way, they ought to give the level 2 chargers out with the cars and let the dealers give them a coupon to get it installed. I don't know why they make that a tricky process. But to your question, insurance works by mutualization. The bigger the pool, the more you spread costs around. And so I think the insurance folks have to, and this is something where the feds could push a little, have to start re-rating. If you start to rate electrics only for electrics, where there's a small number, you're going to get specialty rates. If you can mutualize it among car drivers or owners, you're going to reduce the rates. Now, so basically it's either to do it right, everybody has to pay $1 more a month or whatever it is. I'm not doing the projection, but a little bit more for insurance in the wider pool. Then it would be like getting health insurance, but we have a special policy only for people who have a chronic condition. Well, their premium is going to cost more. The whole idea of insurance is to mutualize a long group to work out the math. And as the EVs go mainstream and the insurance guys know more, the costs will get down. Part of it, I believe, and I'm not an insurance expert, the manufacturing innovations Tesla's done, and they've got about 60% plus of the EVs currently on the road. They're selling a little under that now, but they've had all of it for so long. Gigacasting is brilliant, where they kind of extrude out huge car parts. Bad for the robot spot welding industry, but the problem is it's not quite the same body shop experience and getting parts. So even though Tesla's need less regular maintenance, when you do have it, it can be slow and costly, and that's a drag. So I think the body shop tech and everything else has to kind of catch up, which should take costs down as that scales up. There are also a lot of exotic materials in the real cutting edge EVs that geeks like us buy. I love my BMW iX, but I got as much carbon in that as a damn F-15. Great, do it. Lightweight, strong, beautiful. But I'm hoping that somebody in a old school Bronco doesn't back up, and then I'm going to be in the world of carbon fiber repair, which I really don't want to go to. So I think the insurance problem can be worked over time, but the short term is to mutualize wider and maybe incentivize the insurers to look at it that way.
You can make the argument that's why Tesla had to start their own insurance agency, because the cost to insure it.
And the repairs, though they're less frequent, should be more expensive. And, there's some evidence because they're heavier, you have more tire wear. The tires aren't cheap because they're their own thing. But nothing solves costs like scale. And that's Ford and GM's problem. They have no other than the Bolt, which was still, I think it was number 2 in the country, but not a huge number by Detroit standards, selling 70,000 of them. Scale solves everything in the auto biz. But right now, the market's not ready for that many. It's ready for that many if you can get the price under $29,000. But that's the oddity now. In the luxury market where EVs really exist, they're, I think, over a third now.
The market's not ready because the consumer, you explained in your data, the charging infrastructure. Let's fast forward to the general election here. How does President Biden defend his record on EV investments? He has excluded at every step of the way Tesla, which has majority of the market, but yet the president won't include them, and he's made all these investments with no taxpayer returns. How does he defend that? Because Trump's got a bully pulpit, as you know, and he starts hammering away at something, it catches on.
Yeah, no. They've got a little thing for Tesla. Part of that's Elon, who I'm not the biggest fan because he has a way of putting shareholders third. But I think there may be a peace treaty there as Elon moves to the right. Traditional constituency doesn't like him, but I said in our data, Trump voters and people who are more skeptical of EVs rate him pretty highly. So there might be a marriage of convenience there. I mean, the wider topic of Biden's EV investment, I think you can go on offense on. So 88% of EV manufacturing investment is in 10 states. Number one is Georgia with 34,000 new jobs. 31 billion in investment. Number two is Michigan with about 20,000 new jobs. That's a couple of assembly plants. And those are big numbers. And about 19 billion in new investment. All of it in manufacturing. The other key states in the top five are number five. Georgia and Michigan, by the way, are number two. And they're both critical to decide the presidency electoral college states. Nevada, which leans more Democratic, still 12,000 jobs, 13 billion. That is a lot in a small state. And North Carolina's got 10 billion and 12,000 new jobs. Even Arizona has 10,000 jobs. That all needs to be famous in those states. And I would take Buttigieg, and I'd put him on a tour to every assembly plant in those states and put the spotlight on it, because nobody knows any of this. What they know is Biden likes EVs. I don't trust it. They're green. They're virtue signaling. They irritate me. Biden's trying to shove them down our throats. MAGA. And if you play with one, if you think about it like a car, they convert people. So we got to move the debate. And in those states, there's a great economic job. I mean, I did a lot of Michigan governor races for John Hager. We won 3 times, did Senate races there. It's my home state, done a lot of politics there. And if you're perceived on the side of manufacturing jobs, you're politically powerful there. And they know, the people in the supply chain there know. Now, the union doesn't like EVs because they think, wait a minute, you can build an EV plant with 1,000 people, not 1,800. But the rank and file aren't dumb. They know this stuff is coming. So don't get in a defensive crouch. Start a parade. Always the right move in politics.
So there was data that came out in Bloomberg today that across the United States, union membership is now below 10%, which raises the question, how long can Shawn Fain's power last?
Well, you can argue about, is he kind of a dead cat bounce? The last of the fiery, we're going to unionize everything, or we're going to break the companies, and then we all get to learn Chinese. So is he the last wobble, or is he resetting it all? And I think the test will be how they do on organizing Tesla, Mercedes in Alabama, VW in Georgia. They've come closer in that big VW plant in Chattanooga. And, we're heading for a union election there. The companies need to be, I think they understand they got to raise wages. I would not be cheap, because net they're going to do better if they do a little better on the wage raising. Tesla's doing that too after some blowback that the raises weren't enough. So it's going to be a big test. But one thing I think that if I were some of the surrogate groups for the companies, I wouldn't do it with an auto CEO out of Detroit or anybody, and they might even try this on a retail level. We need a Chinese auto show. We need to grab some BYD Dolphins and put them in malls in Detroit and other places. And this car is coming, and it's not made here. There would increase some consumer demand, but we got to have a little Paul Revere action going on in the future that people get. Because people don't understand that our auto industry is not the largest in the world anymore. They made, 8 million EVs last year? We did about 1.2 million, including imported ones. They passed Japan this year, China did, as number one exporter of vehicles. So I think we got to focus the rank and file minds on some wider issues. And so Fain may work, or Fain might be the last gasp. And by the way, God, I'm sure they've told him, but all right, Shawn, you held us upside down over a cliff. You got the most lucrative wage deals ever. Now let's tackle the absenteeism in the plant that costs us a fortune. Let's take productivity seriously. I'll never forget touring the old Clark Street auto plant, part of the Detroit culture growing up. You go to the Rouge, and Clark Street. And so our high school seniors were all there taking the tour, and guys on the line are like handing us joints and stuff, And so, it just, they're tough jobs, but the money's pretty good now. They got the best healthcare deals of any workers in America. So now they owe the companies some productivity, unless they want to see the whole party end. And we already went through that in the 70s, almost wiped them out. So I don't know. I'm hopeful. I'm going to bet on my Detroit people being smart in the end on both sides.
Is BYD in the Chinese auto manufacturers the biggest threat to the U.S. unions in auto?
Yeah, they're big, they're smart, and they're profitable. They're the one that can stand on their feet because they've got massive scale. But there could be others. They're going to shake out there. They've got a huge domestic market. And the problem is the biggest barrier to EVs is price. And they got an answer for that. And the companies are trying hard and scrambling, making progress, but there's a ticking clock. And people say, I remember I'm old enough, the old park your import in Japan signs at the UAW headquarters in Detroit, and people bashing Toyotas with sledgehammers on TV. But in the end, price and quality won. If you give high quality at a good price, it could be made in asshole land and people will look at buying it. So the idea that jingoism is going to hold them out. We tested some of that stuff in the poll. We did American brands versus Asian brands versus electric brands. Asian brands among Democrats, they did great, same as American. Among Republicans, the Asian brands were running 10 or 12 points below, but nothing like the electric brands, which were radioactive.
CES this year, the big automotive U.S. Detroit, they weren't there. But guess who was there? The Chinese auto manufacturers, and they spent a lot of money. Then you had the Vietnamese one. They were there. VinFast was there, but no presence of U.S.
I mean, pound for pound over the last 10 years, they've done the best job of positioning well. Of course, Kia Hyundai is all over EVs. They got it together. Imagine those companies with huge government subsidies and half their labor costs, what they'd be like. You'd be out buying your EV6 for $27,000. I mean, it's coming. And the only way to win in the end is win on product and price and quality. Product. And they know it. I mean, I'm very impressed with Farley. I just worry his board says we can't afford to lose money anymore with this crap. Let's get some super duties out there, which is a brilliant strategy for Ford to make a lot of money in the next 8 years. And then, the world changes. And I think if the manufacturing side of GM can actually start manufacturing, which is what they're supposed to be core good at, and I think they will. They've got a good product suite on paper coming out. So in Stellantis, they've been slow, but they're smart. That Ram hybrid thing is really smart, and they understand the EV world in Europe. I don't know. I find reasons for optimism, and I don't think anybody is asleep there anymore, but it's a real threat.
With optimism, you need reliability. Mike, in your opinion, how do you see the EV market evolving over the next 4 years from a political standpoint? Does your data, do you see it changing, evolving? Where do you see it going?
Well, on the political barrier, it's going to compound for the worse unless we do something about it, which is why I'm going to go hand in hand to the companies so we can organize this like a campaign and make the election year a reversal point. There are other markets. It's going to keep growing. The luxury segment's going to grow beyond where it is now. The question is the middle segment, and pickup trucks are an issue there. But the tech keeps getting better. So I don't think it's the Biden administration talks about, and the California air regs and everybody talk about like majority by, I think, 2030 or 2035. I don't think that'll happen, but we're no longer going to be in the single digit EV sales numbers in most places. Everything that happens in America and pop culture and marketplaces happens first in California. We're at 20+% now in new car sales. And there are others like Washington, Colorado, Massachusetts, Oregon that are not that far behind us. So I think the outliers will be in 5 years will be places where it's under 12%. I think the median will be in the mid-teens and growing, and California could be up at 24 or 28%, along with some of the other Pacific coasts. So it's coming. It's growing big. It's just not going to change overnight, and the infrastructure has to catch up. We got to fill multifamily units with L2 chargers that people who buy less expensive EVs that are coming can operate without clogging charging stations, and it'll work out. Good products win in the end, and they're good products, and they keep getting better quickly.
Does Tesla continue their dominance in terms of market share as this evolves?
I think we already know they've gone from all market to they have a little over half now. And I wouldn't be surprised if they get into the 40s as the others get better, bigger, and stronger, maybe down, which is still an incredibly dominant share. They do have to figure out this Elon brand thing. I was pretty surprised by the data. The core people in his world are, let's put it this way, split on him at best and off negative. But they still have a product advantage. And, he's got his charging, that supercharging network, kudos to them. That's like Amazon Web Services. That's going to turn into a good business. And with the Magic Dock, he can go after an EV money because he can serve both types of cars. And with NACS taking over in the next 24, 36 months, I think that charging network may turn out to be a huge asset for him. But let's see. I mean, I can tell you, I don't know this for a fact, but I bet money that every Detroit auto CEO is like watching this UAW Tesla organizing thing, praying for Fain to pull it off, just because that would flatten. Tesla has a huge labor cost advantage. So that could be a material factor for Tesla and give them a little more headwinds, along with Elon becoming a bit of a brand limiter. And, the Cybertruck, there's so much gushing about it. And I'm impressed with the way they do the software, the Ethernet loop and the wire harnesses and all that, and some of the engineering, the strong shell. But I've always thought that thing's going to be a dud commercially. We'll see. It's not a great product. It's an interesting statement. And the real secret to Tesla's been the Model Y, which is both a great product and an impressive bit of engineering, though not nearly as breakthrough. And they sell a lot of them. That is the way. Scale is what works.
I think we're going to be surprised on how much they sell of the Cybertruck. It's actually a neat product when you play with an experience. Ari Emanuel out in LA, he's been driving around in one. So you mentioned Elon as a brand limit.
Have you
I ordered one. No, I played with one. Haven't you?
No, it's perfect for agents. It's perfect until the new solar powered Kia comes along. But yeah, no, you're an early adopter. It's my usual love-hate thing with Tesla. I rented a Model Y the other day. I'm in a Polestar 2 up here in New Hampshire. Thank God for level 2 charging at the Hilton True in Concord, because otherwise I'd be at the side of the road. There's just nothing north of Manchester. But we'll see.
Hopefully you can pull out. You mentioned Elon as a brand limiter. So that reminds me, let's go back to the Detroit days. Henry Ford, when he had all that anti-Semitic content in the newspaper he owned. It didn't slow down Ford sales back then. And Elon seeming to obviously he's turning to the right, but he's seeming to be more measured in his messaging now. So how big of a limiter is that?
But Henry Ford didn't have the platform now Elon does. Elon can be in your face every day on Twitter, X, or whatever. We're just taking the temperature. We ask people, favorable, unfavorable, on Elon. In fact, I can look it up here. This is among everybody. What's your opinion of Elon Musk? Mostly favorable, mixed, mostly unfavorable. Mostly favorable, 23%, mixed 45%, mostly unfavorable, 32%. So that's almost double digits underwater. We subtract the favorable from the unfavorable. Give you a contrast, Arnold Schwarzenegger, noted electrification guy, is 33 mostly favorable, 53 mixed, only 13 unfavorable. And Jay Leno, who everybody loves, Republican Democrat, is 50 mostly favorable, 41 mixed, only 8 mostly unfavorable. So if you break it out Republican and D, it looks like butterfly wings, the complete opposite on Elon. So we're going to release a lot of the Elon stuff. We're going to do a report on it and have some fun. I like the camel's nose under the tent part. Nixon to China. He could do good with EV skeptics, so point them on them.
As you produce more data, we'd love to have you back on to go over the data because it's only going to get more interesting, in my opinion. And Mike, for today, as we look to wrap up this insightful conversation, what would you like our listeners to take away with them today?
There's hope. We're going to move the Republicans on this. Good products win in the end. So I remain an optimist. We just have work to do to make the car market regarding EVs about cars, about products, about experience, not about your politics. We got to have an open mind. And to the people on the pro-EV side who want to clutch the green stuff and beat ours over the head with it, I get it. It's kind of emotionally satisfying, but it won't sell any EVs, which doesn't save the planet. But thanks for having me on. And folks, we have a Twitter feed, which is at EV Politics USA. And again, our website full of stuff. Take the quiz. It's a lot of fun. Share it with your friends. evpolitics.org. Grayson, great to talk to you, man. Miss you. We got to have lunch again. We got to talk watches.
Oh, we're going to do that. We're definitely going to talk watches. Mike said it brilliantly. Good products win in the end, and he is correct. It all comes down to the messaging. What Mike has described here with electric vehicles is the same issue that the autonomous vehicle industry will have in the future. The future is bright. The future is autonomous. The future is electric. Mike, thanks so much for coming on the road to autonomy.
Thank you. Thank you.
If you've enjoyed listening, please kindly rate, review, and subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. Want to get in touch? Follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube at Road to Autonomy. Or email podcast@roadtoautonomy.com. The Road to Autonomy podcast is produced by the Road to Autonomy LLC. The views and opinions expressed on the Road to Autonomy podcast do not necessarily reflect those views of the Road to Autonomy, its subsidiaries, its shareholders, directors, investors, or partners. The content discussed on this podcast is for informational purposes only. It should not be taken as legal, investment, tax, or business advice. Nothing is a recommendation that you purchase, sell, or hold any security or other investment, or that you pursue any investment style or strategy. The content of this podcast is presented on an as-is basis with no warranties, express or implied, of any kind. Financial mentions about companies in the Road to Autonomy Index and discussions about the Road to Autonomy Indexes are for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon when making any investment decision. Furthermore, an inclusion of security within the Road to Autonomy Index is not a recommendation by the Road to Autonomy Indices, LLC, to buy, sell, or hold that such security, nor is it considered to be investment advice.